Lily was a bright, curious 9-year-old girl, full of life and energy. She lived with her single mother, Amanda, in a modest house nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Their life was simple, but it was filled with love. Amanda worked long hours at a local bakery, but when she was home, she made sure to spend every possible moment with Lily. They had a routine: dinner together, homework, then stories before bed. Lily loved hearing about her mother's childhood, and Amanda would tell her all the funny and heartwarming tales from her own youth. Their bond was unbreakable, and it felt like nothing could shake their little world. But that all began to change when Amanda met Tom. He was 16, charming and full of life. He had a smile that lit up a room, and when he first came into Amanda's life, he seemed perfect. He was polite, respectful, and treated Lily with kindness. Amanda couldn't help but feel a spark of hope that she had found someone who could not only be a good partner to her, but also a father figure for Lily, who had never known her own father. Tom would play games with Lily, take her to the park, and even help her with her school projects. To Amanda, everything seemed perfect. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she had found stability. Tom's presence in their home became a regular part of their lives. He would come over most evenings after school, and soon it became clear that he was spending more time at their house than anywhere else. Amanda welcomed him into their small world, thinking that this was a step in the right direction. Lily seemed to enjoy his company too, at least at first. She liked having someone to talk to, someone to share her excitement about school and her little joys of life. Tom seemed to genuinely care about her, and for a while everything felt normal. But it wasn't long before Amanda began to notice subtle changes in both Tom and Lily. At first they were easy to overlook, but the more Amanda tried to push them aside, the more obvious they became. Tom, who had once been so warm and affectionate, started to become distant. He wasn't as engaged with Lily as he used to be, and when he did interact with her, it seemed forced, like it was something he had to do rather than something he wanted to do. He spent more time alone in his room, texting or playing video games, and when he did come out, he seemed irritable. He'd snap at Amanda over trivial things, and there was a tension in the house that hadn't been there before. Lily, on the other hand, began to act differently as well. She withdrew from her usual activities and started spending more time alone in her room. She wasn't as excited to go to school or play with her friends. Amanda tried to talk to her, but Lily always said she was fine. However, her actions spoke volumes. She seemed sad and distant, and Amanda couldn't help but wonder if it was something to do with Tom. Yet she pushed those thoughts away, convincing herself that everything would be fine. After all, they had only just begun to build a life with Tom in it. Maybe it was just a phase. The bruises on Lily's arms appeared one evening after she came home from playing outside. Amanda noticed them while she was helping her daughter get ready for bed. At first, she thought they might have been from roughhousing with the other kids, but something about the way Lily flinched when she touched them didn't sit right with her. Still, she brushed it off, telling herself that it was nothing to worry about. She didn't want to believe that anything could be wrong in their perfect little world. The tension in the house continued to grow, but Amanda couldn't put her finger on why. She loved Tom, and she wanted to believe that he was the right person for her. But deep down, a nagging feeling told her that something was off. Something was wrong. As time went on, the tension in the house only grew. Amanda could feel it, but she couldn't quite pinpoint what was causing it. The once joyful and carefree atmosphere had slowly turned into something darker. Tom's behavior became more unpredictable. And Lily's changes were even more noticeable. She was quieter now, hardly ever laughing or playing outside like she used to. Her friends began to comment on how she wasn't coming to play as much. And when she did show up, she seemed distant, almost lost in her own world. At first, Amanda thought it was just growing pains. Lily was getting older, and maybe she just wanted some space. But deep down, Amanda's instincts told her that something wasn't right. Tom's presence in the house also started to feel more oppressive. He would often lock himself in his room for hours, hardly coming out even for meals. When he did, his eyes had a faraway, unfocused look, like he wasn't really there. He became more irritable, snapping at Amanda over the smallest things. She tried to talk to him, to ask if something was bothering him, but he would brush her off with vague answers or excuses. His responses were empty, and his mood seemed to swing from indifference to anger without warning. Amanda knew something was wrong, but she kept telling herself that it was just a phase. He was young, and maybe it was just the pressure of being in a relationship with someone older, with responsibilities that came with living together. She told herself that everything would smooth out, that things would return to normal. But the signs were becoming too glaring to ignore. One evening, as Amanda sat down with Lily to help her with her homework, she noticed how unusually quiet her daughter had become. Lily would usually chat about her day, telling her about her friends and teachers, but tonight, she barely spoke. Her eyes were downcast, and she seemed lost in thought. When Amanda tried to ask her about her day, Lily only gave short, uninterested answers. It was clear something was troubling her, but no matter how much Amanda pushed, Lily refused to talk. The bruises on Lily's arms were becoming more frequent, and Amanda grew increasingly concerned. She asked her daughter again about them, but Lily always seemed to come up with an excuse. She said she had fallen while playing outside or bumped into something by accident. But there was something in her voice, a hesitation, that made Amanda question whether the bruises were really from innocent play. Every time Amanda tried to bring it up, Lily would clam up, avoiding her gaze, and the subject would be quickly dropped. Tom's behavior only worsened. Amanda started noticing how he would look at Lily, not with the warmth and care he once had, but with something else, something darker. His eyes would linger on her for too long, and when he spoke to her, there was a sharpness in his tone. Lily seemed to shrink away from him, avoiding his presence when she could. Amanda couldn't help but feel a rising sense of dread. She felt trapped between her loyalty to Tom and the growing fear that something wasn't right. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt cold and tense. Amanda tried to reach out to Tom, to confront him about his behavior, but he would always shut her down, accusing her of being overly sensitive. He would tell her that she was imagining things, that she was worrying too much. But the nagging feeling in Amanda's chest wouldn't go away. Something was wrong. She could feel it, deep in her bones. But every time she tried to confront Tom, she found herself second-guessing her own thoughts. After all, Tom had never actually done anything to her. He was always polite and respectful to her. So, why did it feel like she was losing control of everything she thought she knew? The dread continued to grow, and yet Amanda could do nothing but ignore it, convincing herself that things would get better. Little did she know that the worst was yet to come. The morning of Lily's disappearance began like any other. Amanda woke up early, ready to start her day at the bakery. She kissed Lily goodbye, who was still sleeping soundly in her bed, and left for work, trusting that Tom would be there to watch over her daughter. It was a typical Wednesday, nothing out of the ordinary. But as the hours passed, Amanda began to feel a strange unease in the pit of her stomach. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It was almost as if she could sense that her world was on the verge of falling apart. At the bakery, Amanda found herself distracted. Her usual focus on the dough, the ovens, the customers was gone. She kept looking at the clock, counting the minutes until she could return home. When she finally got off work and drove back to the house, her mind raced. It wasn't until she reached the front door that she realized something was terribly wrong. The house was unusually quiet. Too quiet. Normally she would hear the sound of the television, or Tom and Lily talking, laughing, or playing. Amanda called out for Lily, but there was no response. She walked through the house, her footsteps echoing in the empty rooms. Her heart began to race, her throat tightening with fear. She checked Lily's room, but the bed was empty. The window was slightly open, and the faint scent of fresh air filled the room. It was as though Lily had gone outside, but why wouldn't she have told her? Why wasn't she home yet? Amanda's mind began to race as she went outside, calling Lily's name. She walked through the front yard, the backyard, and the side of the house, but there was no sign of her daughter. Panic began to set in as the minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Why hadn't Lily returned home yet? It was already getting dark, and Lily never stayed out this late without checking in. Amanda's heart pounded in her chest as she ran to the neighbors' houses, knocking frantically on doors. No one had seen Lily. No one knew where she was. Then, in the midst of her panic, Amanda remembered Tom. She ran back inside the house, desperate to ask him where Lily was. He was sitting in the living room, staring blankly at the wall, his hands resting on his knees. His expression was distant, emotionless. When Amanda asked him where Lily was, Tom simply shrugged. He hadn't seen her, he said. She must have gone out to play or was hiding somewhere. But Amanda's instincts told her that something was wrong. Tom wasn't acting like himself, and there was something off about his response. She tried calling Lily's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Time seemed to slow as Amanda's fear turned into desperation. She called the police, explaining that her daughter was missing. Within minutes, officers arrived, and the search began. The neighborhood was combed from top to bottom, but there was no sign of Lily. As the hours passed, the feeling of dread grew heavier. The police interviewed Tom, who gave them the same vague answers. He seemed unfazed by the situation, which only deepened Amanda's suspicion. Why was he so calm? Why wasn't he more worried? The next few hours were a blur of flashing lights, police radios, and frantic searching. It wasn't until the neighbor across the street heard a faint scream that the truth began to unfold. Amanda was standing outside, pacing, when she saw the flashing lights approach the backyard. The authorities had found something. They asked her to stay back as they moved through the yard. The air felt thick with tension as Amanda stood frozen, her heart racing in her chest. It wasn't long before the worst possible news arrived. Lily's body had been found in the backyard, just a few feet away from where Amanda had been searching. The authorities carefully examined the scene, and what they found left them horrified. Lily had been bitten repeatedly, and the bite marks were deep and jagged. Her body had been left behind in a way that suggested she had fought for her life. There was no sign of a struggle inside the house, but something about the scene outside made it clear that Lily had been in terrible danger. Amanda's world shattered in that moment. The child she loved, the little girl she had raised with all her heart, was gone. And as the police turned their focus to Tom, Amanda's mind raced with questions. What had happened? Why was her daughter outside? Why was Tom so distant and unbothered? She couldn't process the horror of what she had just witnessed. She had no answers, only the gut-wrenching realization that everything she thought she knew was a lie. Her daughter was dead, and the only person who seemed unaffected was Tom. And that was when Amanda began to fear that the true horror of the situation was still yet to be revealed. The investigation into Lily's death moved quickly, but nothing about it made sense. The police had gathered evidence, but there were so many unanswered questions, and as they continued their search, it became clear that Tom was at the center of it all. His behavior, his attitude, everything about him had been strange that night. He seemed to lack any real emotion, showing no signs of distress over the tragic loss of a child who had once been so close to him. The more the authorities dug into Tom's background, the more disturbing the findings became. Tom had only been living with Amanda and Lily for a few months, but the investigation revealed that he had a history of violence. Though his past was largely hidden, there were reports from his previous schools of angry outbursts, conflicts with authority, and incidents where he had harmed animals. It was a pattern that was starting to make a horrific kind of sense. What had once seemed like youthful rebellion was now starting to look like something much more sinister. His time with Amanda had been carefully curated to make him appear kind and innocent, but underneath the surface, he had been hiding his true nature. The more the police spoke to people from his past, the clearer it became that Tom had always been someone who struggled with controlling his anger. He had been in and out of foster homes for most of his life due to behavior problems. When he had met Amanda, he saw an opportunity. She was kind, vulnerable, and desperate for stability in her life. She had welcomed him into their home, unaware of the darkness he had brought with him. It wasn't long before Tom had begun to manipulate Amanda, making her believe that everything was fine. He would put on a facade of being a perfect boyfriend and future stepfather, doing just enough to convince her that he was a good person. But Tom had been more focused on isolating Lily than anyone had realized. It wasn't long before he began to subtly undermine the bond between mother and daughter. He would tell Amanda that Lily was acting out or being difficult, fueling her own concerns about her daughter's behavior. And while Amanda was distracted, Tom would slip deeper into his control. Lily, once a happy and open child, started to withdraw. She avoided Tom, but Tom would not be ignored. He would try to engage her, but it wasn't with kindness. It was with manipulation. Slowly, but surely, he had begun to chip away at Lily's trust, until the girl who once loved him like a big brother began to fear him. The bite marks found on Lily's body were more than just a sign of physical violence. They were a manifestation of Tom's twisted control. Forensics revealed that the bites were deep, inflicted with such force that they couldn't have been anything other than deliberate. It wasn't just an outburst of anger. It was something more calculated, more predatory. Tom had acted with a chilling sense of purpose, and the realization hit everyone involved in the case like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just a tragic accident. This was murder. As the police closed in on Tom, his demeanor became more erratic. At first, he denied any involvement, claiming that he didn't know what had happened to Lily. He insisted that he hadn't seen her after she went outside to play. But the evidence didn't lie. The forensic team found traces of Lily's blood on his clothes, and his fingerprints were discovered on the broken window in her room. Tom's story began to unravel, and the authorities finally realized that he had been lying from the start. He had been the last person to see Lily, and his behavior after her death raised more suspicion than ever. Tom's motive, however, was still unclear. What could have driven him to such a brutal act? The detectives continued to dig into his troubled past, hoping to find an explanation. In interviews, Tom remained eerily calm, showing no real remorse or guilt for his actions. When questioned about the night Lily died, he simply shrugged. His lack of emotion only made everything more chilling. It was as though he viewed the murder as a means to an end, a way to remove an obstacle from his life. The investigation continued, and the more the police uncovered, the more the community was shaken. The boy who had seemed like such a sweet, harmless teenager had turned out to be capable of something horrific. It became clear that Tom had been hiding his violent tendencies beneath a mask of charm and charisma, and the entire neighborhood had been fooled. But as the truth came to light, the painful realization settled in. Lily had been the victim of someone who had once been trusted, and the consequences were far beyond anything Amanda could have ever imagined. As the case against Tom progressed, the weight of what had happened slowly started to sink in. Amanda was numb, caught between the unbearable grief of losing her daughter and the deep, gnawing guilt that she had allowed this to happen. She kept thinking back to the moments before Lily's death, to the signs she had ignored, to the things she had overlooked in her desperation for love and companionship. She had trusted Tom. She had believed him when he said everything was fine, when he insisted that Lily was just going through a phase. Now, that trust felt like a betrayal, a fatal mistake that had cost her daughter her life. The trial was a painful process, one that Amanda dreaded with every fiber of her being. She had to relive every moment of the nightmare, the night Lily had gone missing, the hours of frantic searching, the horror of finding her lifeless body in the backyard. The courtroom was filled with tension as the evidence against Tom mounted. His history of violence, the forensic evidence that linked him directly to Lily's murder, and his cold, emotionless demeanor all painted a chilling portrait of a boy capable of unspeakable things. Tom's defense tried to argue that he had been under stress, that he had snapped in a moment of rage, but nothing they said could justify what had happened. The medical examiner testified that the bite marks on Lily's body were deliberate, done with such force and malice that it left no doubt in anyone's mind that her death had been a calculated act of violence. Tom's lack of remorse, his indifference to Lily's suffering, only added to the horror of the situation. There was no explanation for his actions, no reason that could make sense of the brutal, senseless murder of a 9-year-old girl. As the trial neared its conclusion, the jury deliberated for what seemed like hours. Amanda sat in the courtroom, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, her face a mask of grief and disbelief. She couldn't bring herself to look at Tom. He was sitting across the room, staring blankly ahead, as though he hadn't committed the most monstrous crime imaginable. She wondered if he even understood the enormity of what he had done, or if he was simply numb to it all. Finally, the jury returned with their verdict. Tom was found guilty of first-degree murder, and the courtroom erupted into a mixture of relief and sorrow. Amanda felt the weight of the moment, but it was hollow. The verdict didn't bring her daughter back. It didn't heal the deep, gaping wound in her heart. Justice had been served, but it felt like a small comfort compared to the loss she would carry with her for the rest of her life. In the months that followed, Amanda tried to put the pieces of her life back together. The house, once filled with laughter and love, now felt empty and cold. There were days when she couldn't bring herself to leave her bed, when the grief was too much to bear. But slowly, she began to take small steps forward. She started therapy, tried to reconnect with old friends, and found solace in remembering the good times she had shared with Lily. She clung to the memories of her daughter's smile, her laughter, her boundless energy. But the pain of her absence was always there, a constant ache in the back of her mind. Tom, meanwhile, was sentenced to life in prison, but for Amanda, the justice system's verdict didn't seem to matter much anymore. What did justice mean when it couldn't bring back the child she had lost? What comfort was there in knowing that Tom would never hurt anyone else, when the one person who mattered most was gone forever? The community, too, was forever changed. People who had once welcomed Tom into their homes, who had believed in his innocent charm, were left reeling. They, too, had been fooled. The news of the crime spread like wildfire, and many struggled to reconcile the boy they had known with the monster he had become. The neighborhood, once a safe and quiet place, was now haunted by the ghost of what had happened, and as Amanda stood alone in her home, surrounded by the silence that had once been filled with her daughter's laughter, she knew that nothing would ever be the same. The love she had for Lily would never die, but it was a love that would always carry with it a deep and painful wound. In the end, the greatest tragedy wasn't just the loss of her daughter. It was the realization that the trust she had placed in someone who seemed so harmless had led to the unimaginable. The world, once so familiar, had been irrevocably changed, and in that darkness, Amanda could only try to find a way to live with the truth, one painful step at a time.